Ecclesiastes. There is a time for everything, a season for every purpose under heaven, a season to be born and a season to die, a season to plant and a season to harvest, a season to hurt and a season to heal, a season to tear down and a season to build up, a season to cry and a season to laugh, a season to mourn and a season to dance, a season to scatter stones and a season to gather them, a season for holding close and a season for holding back, a season to seek and a season to lose, a season to keep and a season to throw away, a season to tear and a season to mend, a season to be silent and a season to speak, a season to love and a season to hate, a season for hostilities and a season of peace.
Would you pray with me? Ground of our being. As we open ourselves to your light, to a spirit of life and love, may we be embraced by that warmth, held by that strength, propelled forward by that courage. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. I usually have a non-biblical reading, and it wasn't working for me this time. And then I found a poem I wrote at one point. I used to do a lot more of this. This was written, I don't know when, but it was clearly in the times of great loss. In the midst of life, we are in death. Who told the sun it could still shine? Or the birds they could still sing? Or the flowers they could still bloom? How can the world keep moving as if nothing happened? I want a dark, overcast day with rain to mingle with my tears, or be the tears when I run out. I want silence because there's nothing left to say. I don't want hope or even comfort. I want to wail and gnash my teeth at the unfairness of it all. I want to just be with all of it, because the pain tells me the love was real and deep and true, because somehow the sorrow connects me to them. Time to just be in the face of loss. When does that happen? Sometimes adulting is just no fair, because it means that even in the midst of great loss, we have to keep moving, and our society, our culture expects us to keep moving. When do we find that time to just be with the sorrow instead of having to worry about paying the bills and making dinner and doing the laundry and fixing the car and taking care of the kids or the grandkids or getting to the doctor, whatever it is. And so we have moments like this, where we have just a minute to be with that loss, with that grief, with that sorrow. And so, but that whole juxtaposition is life, isn't it? We have the losses, but then we have the life that there is to live, and everything that goes with it. And so the big question becomes, how do we live and grieve? Or how do we grieve and live? I'm not even sure which one comes first anymore. How do we do both. You've all heard the Ecclesiastes passage, probably many times. Do you recognize the profoundness of what Ecclesiastes was saying? You know, he was a realist. He was a teacher who just kind of laid it right out there, and he said, all of these things are part of life. And not because some divine being somewhere is making them happen, just because this is part of being human. To be fully human means that we are going to build up and tear down. We're going to laugh and we're going to cry. We're going to mourn and we're going to dance. We're going to mend and we're going to sew. We're going to have really crappy days and really good days. And to be human means to live every single one of them to the fullest. And so often that means that we live and grieve at the same darn time. It's a balance that we try to strike. And it's not so much an easy balance to do. I can assure you that I know all too well how hard it is to live and to grieve at the same time. And I think maybe the best advice I have is to fake it until you make it. Because eventually, one day, you will be faking it less. And less. And less. What happens when we choose only one side of those pairs that Ecclesiastes gives us? What happens if we choose only joy or only sorrow? What if we refuse to see all of it as part of this great wholeness? What if we decide that one is bad and one is good, instead of embracing it all as something that we can grow and learn from, so that we become more wise, more compassionate, more kind? What would happen? My two big questions of the day that I'm asking you to answer. What happens when we refuse to do the work of grieving? Mike?
You kind of close the door instead of looking out the window, or vice versa. Opening the window and closing the door to
what? What are you closing the door to?
To find happiness and also to grieve.
To find happiness and to grieve. But people are going, grieving hurts.
Right.
Why should I do that?
Because that's healing.
Because that's healing. Why else?
You have to grieve.
Go ahead. What did you say?
I just said you have to grieve.
You have. Yeah. Not everybody would agree with you, but I would.
Yeah.
Jean?
Because grief finds you.
Grief.
You can put it off, but it finds you.
It finds you. It does. And you may not name it as grief when it finds you, but true. Maggie?
Feelings don't have meanings. You lose meaning in your life.
If you don't have feelings, you lost meaning. That was you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You lose the meaning without feelings. Shirley?
Personal experience, it makes you afraid to live life. And get stuck in, way down, and
So if you don't let it out, it all goes within. And you get stuck there in your fears, in stuff you don't even know because it's so hidden. Julie? No, I got your hand up. Jessica?
I feel like they can internalize and then turn into other emotions like anger or things like that, and come out in other ways towards others and yourself.
Absolutely. So it becomes internalized and comes out in usually not good ways, like anger and negativity and so forth. Stephen?
I feel like if you don't feel grief, you can't feel happiness.
If you can't feel grief, you also, as Mike said, you shut the door to so much, right? You shut the door to happiness too. Clarice?
If you can't deal with your own grief, it's really hard to be compassionate to others who may be grieving.
Mm-hmm. If you can't touch your own grief, how do you touch someone else's in a meaningful, compassionate way? Mike?
We're built to grieve, and when we forget that, we forget the legacy of all our predecessors.
Yeah. So we said we're built to grieve. Why else be able to cry, right? but yeah, we forget the legacy that's behind us if we don't feel it. I also think there's the potential for being aloof. You become a person who is untouchable. It refuses to be vulnerable. And how do you have relationships with others if you nurture that aloofness? So that's what happens if we don't touch grief. You all did really well. So what happens when we won't embrace the joyful moments? Because so many times when we're going through grief, like the end of my poem said, I just want to sit in the sadness because I feel like that connects me. And I left it there because that's where I was that day. It's not what I believe overall. I think there's certainly more that connects us. But so many people think if I do something joyful, then I'm forgetting them. Right? And that's a bad thing. But what happens if we shut out the joy? Right? You're good at this.
Darkness is, in some people's lives, joy. That dark feeling, like not wanting to be happy, becomes their
It becomes their purpose. I hesitate to say
not
it's
joy,
their
I don't mean, but like their purpose.
Yes.
I can't be happy because. I don't want to be happy because.
Right.
There's always a because, not or even but. I'm happy but.
Right. So some people revel in that. I think in some ways, for some people, it's a punishment.
Yeah.
It's a self-punishment. Jessica?
I just kind of think of if it's a loss of a loved one, that somehow by not having that joy, you would do a disservice to that loved one that would probably want you to have that joy, the happiness.
So Jessica said sometimes you're doing a disservice not only to yourself, but to the memory of that person that you're trying to honor. Right? And I'm not saying that we all can go out there and be immediately happy and joyful, but I'm saying that over the course of time, we have the opportunity to go to weddings and birthdays and baptisms and celebrations, and we carry that live and grieve balance with us. And if we don't embrace the living part of it, this is what happens. We refuse a way to heal. We refuse a way to honor. We refuse a way to move forward. We deny the very, perhaps, purpose of what life is about, which Ecclesiastes goes on to say, and what more is there than to live and work and enjoy life? So, Paula Darcy, many of you have probably read her books, heard about her. She lost both a husband and a young daughter, very young daughter. And she threw herself into her grief so that 3 years had gone by of just deep, deep grieving. She said in her own words that she was handcuffed to the memories of them. Until her friend Paul approached her and confronted her and said, look, you believe that all you are is a grieving widow and mother, nothing else. You're choosing not to live for today. You've completely given up on the person that you were meant to be. And Paula said that while she really didn't want to hear all of that, it was the wake-up call she needed. Because she really didn't want to be living half a life. She didn't really want to be mired in grief for years on end. Nor, as Jessica just said, did she want that to be the way that she honored her husband and her daughter. She didn't want her tribute to them to be loving less and living less. But that her tribute to them should be an opening to even more love and to even more life. So let me share a couple of stories with you about living and grieving. Just this last week, I had a woman who was canvassing the neighborhood come to the door. And somehow we got to chit-chatting, and she said she's a minister. I'm like, oh, I'm a minister, and I should open the floodgates, right? So we're chit-chatting. And she was up here from Texas, a lot of Texas going around, from San Antonio. She was able to do it because she was out of a job at the moment. But she said, with tears in her eyes, and kind of choked up, she said that her mother had died 4 months earlier. And her mother had told her before she passed away that she wished that Kirsten could vote twice. Once for her. And obviously she didn't make it long enough to cast her vote. But Kirsten, when the opportunity arose to go to a state across the country and try and help get people to vote, she took it. And so she was living and grieving at the same time. About 21 years ago, I had a pianist, organist by the name of Henry. And his significant other was named Mona. She was a magnificent pianist as well. They'd often play these incredible duets at church. And then Mona had a reoccurrence of breast cancer. And it was very aggressive and wasn't going to go well. And her one desire was to make it to her daughter Jennifer's wedding in South Carolina. And as we got closer and closer and she ended up in the hospital, it was clearer and clearer that there was no way that A, she would be able to travel to South Carolina, or B, that she was likely to make it that long. So I'm telling you now, never underestimate the women in a church. Because within 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks, they had that wedding moved from South Carolina to Franksville. With everything. A bridal shower, a rehearsal dinner, a reception, flowers, nails and hair for the bride, the photographer, anything you were supposed to have, they had it in 2 weeks. Jennifer and Justin flew up the day before the wedding, went straight to the hospital, got there about noon to see her mom. But Mona had already become unresponsive. They were there long enough to say goodbye and be with her when she died that afternoon. The wedding was scheduled for the next day. And they chose to get married anyways. To honor her, to celebrate her, and yet living and grieving, right? Embracing both of it at the same time. Hard but beautiful. Part of me wishes that we'd been Jewish. There's that Jewish tradition of stamping on a glass, right? How many of you know where that comes from? You know where the story behind it? Yeah, so the story behind it is that way back when, a couple of generations after the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, there was a couple getting married and they had this great community feast. And it was a wonderful time, and the father of the groom, who happened to be a rabbi, was sort of sitting back and watching all of his friends and family and his colleagues, all those other rabbis, and he's starting to get more and more agitated as the night goes on because they're just reveling in all of this joy. They're dancing and they're drinking and they're having a good old time. And this old rabbi finally gets so, he just thinks to himself, it's too much. It's like the temple never burned. Remember, this is generations ago. But he picks up a glass, a beautiful white glass, crystal glass, and he raises it high and he smashes it to the ground. And the sound of that shattered glass brought everybody back to themselves for a moment, and they remembered. And so the tradition continues on. A glass is put in a little bag and it's stomped on at the ceremony. And it's not to put a damper on living and life and celebrating. It's to remember that we hold joy and sorrow in tension. That even in the midst of our most wonderful moments, we are connected by that invisible thread to everyone throughout the world. To those who are grieving and those who are sorrowing and those who are struggling. It's a reminder that we're all one. One last story. Rabbi Sharon Rouse tells a story about a little boy named Giddy. Gotta be short for Gideon. Giddy died in a tragic boating accident just shy of his 5th birthday. And Giddy was one of these bright lights in their congregation. He was the kid who dressed in bright colors all the time, and he loved shiny things and sparkles. And he was the one who, in the ice cream store, would go up and introduce himself to strangers. And so the congregation was devastated by the loss of little Giddy. After the funeral, the parents came to Rabbi Sharon and they said, we'll be at the next Shabbat to say the Mourner's Kaddish. And the Mourner's Kaddish is a prayer that you say in community after someone's died or on the anniversary of deaths. The struggle was that that Shabbat was also to be a little boy named Nico's bar mitzvah. And she wrote that Nico wasn't one of these kids who had to be cajoled or coerced to doing all the work that went into his bar mitzvah. He was totally into it, this little boy was. He relished every moment of that learning, and he deserved a day of celebration for that. In the end, they figured out how to hold space for both. How to live and how to grieve. And at his bar mitzvah party, they lifted him up on a chair and they danced him around the room and they sang and they threw candy at him. And little Giddy's parents sat on the side and they watched. Shattered and yet still part of living. How do we do it? How do we walk through living and grieving? Because we don't forget that there's that invisible thread that continues to tug at our hearts and remind us of the love that was there. Sometimes we carry mementos. I have both of my grandmother's wedding rings on my fingers. I have stones from a ring from my mom and my second mom on my hand. How about you? Anybody carry something? You've got Noel's wedding ring around your neck. Oh, you've got them around your fingers now, yeah.
Yes, I had my cousin's, my ring and my ring apart.
That's right. That's right. She had her ring and Noel's ring cut apart and rejoined it. So she, and his mother's engagement ring? Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
I have my grandma's wedding rings. They don't fit, but I keep them close.
So you keep your grandma's wedding rings?
Yes.
We hold those things. It's not that, it's one of those things that helps us to just get through. A writer wrote that maybe if we're struggling with that living and grieving and we have to have a fancy dinner, that we leave out something that we would normally have in. Or that if we're going out and we're holding that tension of living and grieving, that we leave off a piece of jewelry that we would normally wear as a reminder or a honoring of that loss. There's so many ways to symbolically hold that tension. And it's okay. It's okay to live and to grieve. In fact, I think it's essential that we live and grieve when we're going through these times. Martha Hickman wrote, she said, in the deepest of winter, on the darkest of nights, what are we to do? She said, we acknowledge the cold and the dark and the mystery of the unknowable black ocean that seems to stretch in front of us to infinity. And then we sing. She said, in other words, we light a candle, like we did today, instead of cursing the darkness. Amen.